Imagine waking up 12,000 years ago. There are no cities, no roads, no supermarkets, no apartment buildings, no factories, no governments, no countries. There isn't even a word for civilization. You wake up beside a small fire. Around you are a few dozen people, your family, your friends, your entire community. You spend the morning looking for food. Maybe you're collecting wild plants. Maybe you're hunting. Maybe you're fishing. Maybe you're checking traps. And when the food becomes harder to find, you move. You pack what you can carry. You walk somewhere else. This was normal human life for an enormous part of our history. Humans had lived this way for hundreds of thousands of years. Then something happened. People started staying. They planted food. They built permanent houses. They stored grain. They made pottery. They raised animals. They created villages, then towns, then cities, then governments, then writing, then kings, then armies, then entire civilizations. But why? Why would humans suddenly stop moving? Why would a species that had survived by following animals and seasonal food sources decide to stay in one place? And perhaps the strangest part is this. Civilization didn't appear because someone woke up one morning and decided to invent it. It happened through thousands of small changes, and some of those changes completely transformed the human world. For most of human history, humans were hunter-gatherers. That doesn't mean they spent every second hunting. It means they survived by using whatever food their environment provided. Plants, fruits, roots, fish, shellfish, insects, small animals, large animals, whatever was available. And because food moved, humans moved too. If the animals disappeared, you followed them. If the plants stopped producing food, you went somewhere else. If water became scarce, you moved toward water. Your home wasn't necessarily a building. Your home was the landscape. And this lifestyle worked. It worked for an incredibly long time. But then the climate began changing. Around the end of the last ice age, the world became warmer. Glacier began retreating. Some environments became more productive. Plants spread. Animals changed their ranges. And humans began experimenting with a different way of living. One of the most important changes happened in the Fertile Crescent. This region of the Middle East contained wild grasses that would eventually become some of the world's most important crops. Wheat, barley, and other plants that could be collected, processed, stored, and eventually cultivated. At first, people didn't necessarily understand that they were creating agriculture. They were simply gathering useful plants. But imagine noticing something. Every year, the same plants appear in the same area. You collect their seeds. You bring some back. You return later. More plants are there. Eventually, humans began deliberately planting and managing crops. And this changed the rules. A wild plant gives you food today. A field gives you food later. But a field has a requirement. You have to stay near it. You have to protect it. You have to water it. You have to harvest it. You have to store the food. And suddenly, moving away isn't so easy. The landscape is no longer just something you travel through. It becomes something you manage. And this is where permanent settlements begin to make more sense. Instead of moving constantly, people could stay, build houses, store food, raise children, protect their crops, and return to the same place every year. At first, these settlements were small. Some were only collections of houses. But something important happened when people stayed together. There were more people in one place. And when more people live together, more things become possible. One person can grow food. Another can make tools. Another can build houses. Another can hunt. Another can make pottery. Another can trade. People begin specializing, and specialization creates something powerful. Time. If one person becomes extremely good at making tools, they don't have to spend all their time growing food. Someone else can produce the food. The toolmaker produces tools. The farmer produces food. The potter produces containers. The builder produces houses. And the community exchanges these things. The result is a system where people can become very good at very specific jobs. But agriculture had another enormous advantage. Surplus. A hunter who catches one animal has food. But if a farmer grows more grain than the family needs, the extra grain can be stored. And stored food changes society. Because now food can support people who aren't producing food directly. You can have builders, toolmakers, traders, religious specialists, administrators, soldiers, and eventually, rulers. This is one of the foundations of civilization. Not just food, stored food. Because once food can be stored, power can also be stored. Someone has to protect it. Someone has to count it. Someone has to distribute it. Someone has to decide who gets what. And suddenly, you need organization. But there was a problem. People don't always agree. Imagine hundreds of people living together. Someone takes another person's grain. Someone moves a boundary. Someone damages another person's crops. Someone refuses to contribute. Someone claims more land. Arguments become conflicts. conflicts. Small communities can sometimes solve problems through personal relationships. But as communities become larger, that becomes harder, and this creates another invention. Rules, then leaders, then systems for enforcing those rules, and eventually, governments. But civilization didn't just appear in one place. Different societies developed agriculture and permanent settlements in different regions. In the Fertile Crescent, in China, in the Indus Valley, in parts of Africa, in New Guinea, in Mesoamerica, and elsewhere, the exact paths were different. The crops were different. The animals were different. The environments were different. But the basic pattern could be similar. Food becomes more predictable. People settle. Populations grow. Communities become more complex. Trade expands. Specialized jobs appear. And eventually, cities emerge. One of the earliest major urban civilizations appeared in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Thousands of years ago, communities grew into increasingly complex settlements, and eventually came cities such as Uruk. Uruk was enormous compared with earlier villages. Thousands of people could live within its urban system. There were temples, workshops, homes, storage facilities, administrative systems, and huge numbers of people doing different jobs. But managing a city creates another problem. Information. Imagine collecting grain from thousands of farmers. How do you remember who gave how much? How much is stored? How much was distributed? Who owes something? Who received something? You can't remember all of it. So humans developed something revolutionary: writing. And one of the earliest forms of writing wasn't a poem. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a story. It was accounting, records, numbers, goods, grain, animals, workers. Writing helped governments and institutions manage increasingly complicated societies. And once humans could write, something else happened. Memory could escape the human brain. A person could die, but their records could remain. A ruler could make an order. A scribe could record it. A merchant could record a transaction. A society could preserve laws. Human knowledge became easier to store and transmit, and this helped civilization grow even further. But there's a darker side to the story. Civilization gave humans incredible advantages, but it also created new problems. When thousands of people live close together, disease can spread more easily. Waste accumulates. Food supplies can fail. Conflicts become larger. And now there is something worth fighting over: land, food, water, livestock, trade routes, stored wealth. A small hunter-gatherer band might fight over resources, but a city can fight with hundreds or thousands of people. And eventually, armies appear. This creates a strange contradiction. Civilization makes humans more powerful, but it also gives humans new ways to hurt one another. And then there is inequality. In a small mobile community, carrying everything you own limits how much wealth you can accumulate. But once people settle, you can own land, you can store grain, you can own animals, you can control resources, you can control workers. Some people become richer, others become poorer, some become powerful, others become dependent, and the social structure becomes increasingly complicated. At the top, rulers, priests, administrators, warriors, merchants, then farmers, laborers, and sometimes enslaved people. Civilization created enormous achievements, but it also created enormous inequality. And yet, people kept building. They built larger temples, larger houses, larger walls, larger cities. They developed mathematics, astronomy, engineering, metalworking, long-distance trade. They studied the seasons. They tracked the movement of the sun. They watched the stars. They measured land. They built irrigation systems. They created calendars. And eventually, they built monuments that would survive thousands of years. But here's something important. Civilization wasn't inevitable. There were farming communities that remained relatively small. There were mobile societies that continued hunting and gathering. There were people who combined farming with movement. There wasn't one universal path from cave to city. Human societies experimented. Some settled, some moved, some farmed, some hunted, some did both. And different environments produced different solutions. That's why the story of civilization isn't really the story of humans becoming smarter. Humans were already intelligent long before cities existed. Our ancestors could make tools, control fire, communicate, plan hunts, teach children, travel enormous distances, build shelters, and survive some of the harshest environments on Earth. The human brain didn't suddenly appear when civilization began. What changed was the system around the human brain. People began living in larger groups. Food became more manageable. Knowledge accumulated. Jobs became specialized. Trade connected distant communities. Institutions became powerful. And one generation could build on what the previous generation had created. That may be the real secret of civilization. Not one genius, not one invention. Accumulation. Innovation. A farmer discovers something. A child learns it. That child teaches another person. Someone improves the technique. Someone else invents a tool. Another person improves the tool. Eventually, thousands of small improvements become something enormous. A village becomes a town. A town becomes a city. A city becomes a kingdom. A kingdom becomes an empire. And suddenly, humans are no longer simply surviving in nature. They are transforming the landscape around them. Fields replace wild grasslands. Roads cross the land. Canals redirect rivers. Walls surround cities. Ships cross oceans. And eventually, humans begin reshaping entire ecosystems. But perhaps the strangest part is remembering where this started. With a few people around a fire. People who had no idea what a city was. No idea what a government was. No idea what writing was. No idea that thousands of years later, humans would build machines capable of flying through the sky. They were simply trying to survive, find food, stay warm, protect their children, and make it through another winter. Then one day, humans began staying. And once they stayed, everything changed. The first house led to another. The first field led to another. The first stored harvest created the need for storage. Storage created the need for protection. Protection created the need for organization. Organization created leaders. Leaders created institutions. Institutions created states. And states created civilizations. It wasn't one moment. It was a chain. One change making another possible. And perhaps that's the most fascinating thing about the beginning of civilization. Humans didn't suddenly stop being ancient. They simply started building something that could outlive them. A house could remain after its builder died. A field could be inherited. A tool could be passed to a child. A written record could survive its author. A city could survive generations. And knowledge could move from one generation to the next. For the first time on a massive scale, humans weren't just inheriting nature. They were inheriting the work of other humans. And that changed everything. The world we live in today. Cities, roads, farms, governments, markets, books, technology. All of it sits at the end of a very long chain. And that chain began with ancient humans making a strange decision. To stay, to plant, to build, to store, to cooperate, and sometimes to fight. Civilization wasn't created in a single day. It was built slowly by people who had no idea they were building civilization at all. And that's perhaps the biggest mystery of human history. We think of civilization as something enormous. Cities, kings, monuments, empires. But before all of that, there was just a small group of humans standing around a fire, trying to decide where to live tomorrow.